There are certain behaviors I've noticed in seniors, things that happen gradually, almost invisibly, that no one wants to talk about. Not family members, not doctors, sometimes not even other caregivers. But I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I've seen these patterns hundreds of times. And here's what troubles me most. These behaviors aren't just embarrassing or difficult. They're often warning signs of something deeper, signs that isolation is taking hold, that depression has quietly moved in, that someone is giving up in small ways they don't even recognize. I want to be clear about something before we start. I'm not judging these behaviors. I've watched the gentlest souls become harsh. I've seen the most social people withdraw completely. I've cared for people who went from meticulous about their appearance to barely brushing their teeth. And what I've learned is this: these changes almost always have a reason. Pain you're trying to manage, grief you haven't processed, fear you can't name, loss of control showing up in the ways you still can control. If you've noticed yourself snapping at people you love, or withdrawing from activities that used to bring you joy, or letting things slide that you used to care about, I want you to know that noticing it is the first step. That awareness matters. You're not becoming a bad person. Something underneath is trying to get your attention. And if you're watching this about a parent or loved one, if you've noticed changes that concern you but you don't know how to name them or whether you should say something, you're not imagining it. And you're not betraying them by noticing. The fact that you're here, trying to understand, tells me everything I need to know about how much you care. I'm sharing this not to shame anyone, but because I've sat with too many families who said, "I wish someone had told us this was happening." I've been the person in the room when these patterns emerge. I've had the conversations that families didn't know how to have. And I want to share what I've observed, not to embarrass anyone, but to help you understand what might be happening beneath the surface. Because here's what I've learned after 15 years of this work. These behaviors aren't character flaws. They're communication. Your body and mind trying to tell you something important. When someone starts acting in ways that seem unlike them, it's almost never about laziness or stubbornness or just getting old. It's about something harder, something that needs attention, something that, with the right support, can often be addressed. I'm going to walk you through 12 patterns I've witnessed over and over. Some of them might be hard to hear. Some of them you might recognize in yourself or someone you love. But I promise you this: understanding what these behaviors actually mean is the first step toward doing something about them. And I've watched people turn these patterns around when they got the help they needed. So stay with me, because awareness is the beginning of change. The first pattern I need to tell you about is one I've seen destroy relationships: constant negativity and complaining. I cared for a woman I'll call Margaret. I use a different name to protect her privacy. She was 74 when I started working with her. And when I first walked into her home, I was struck by how gracious she was. She always had fresh flowers on the kitchen table. She'd ask about my day. She'd tell me stories about her garden, about her grandchildren, about the book she was reading. But over about 6 months, something shifted. The flowers stopped appearing. The questions stopped coming. Instead, everything became a complaint. The weather was too hot. The neighbors were too loud. Her daughter didn't visit enough. Nothing was right anymore. And I watched her daughter's face during visits, the exhaustion, the guilt, the slow pulling away. Margaret was pushing away the people who loved her most, and she didn't even realize she was doing it. Here's what her family didn't know, but I saw every day. Margaret was in constant pain, arthritis in her hands, her knees, her back. But she'd been raised not to complain about physical discomfort, so she never mentioned it. Instead, that pain came out sideways, as criticism, as negativity, as finding fault with everything around her. When we finally got her pain managed with proper medication and physical therapy, I watched the gracious woman return. The flowers came back. The questions about my day returned. Her daughter started visiting more often again. The second pattern is withdrawal from social connection. I've cared for people who were once the life of every gathering, and then slowly, quietly, they stopped answering the phone, stopped going to church, stopped meeting friends for coffee. Their families often assume it's a preference, that mom just wants more quiet time now. But I've learned to ask a different question. Is this preference or is this depression? I cared for a man I'll call Thomas. He was 73. His phone used to ring constantly. Old work friends, his bowling league, his sister checking in. But over the course of a year, he stopped picking up. Then the calls stopped coming. His son thought he was just becoming more introverted with age. But I was there 3 days a week, and I could see what was really happening. Thomas wasn't choosing solitude. Depression had moved in so gradually that no one, including Thomas himself, had noticed. He didn't wake up sad. He just woke up with no energy to connect, no desire to engage. The world had gone gray, and he thought that was just what aging felt like. The third pattern is decline in personal hygiene and self-care. When someone who was always meticulous about their appearance suddenly stops showering regularly, stops changing clothes, stops brushing their teeth, families often get frustrated. They think it's laziness or stubbornness. But in my 15 years of doing this work, I've learned when basic self-care feels insurmountable, that's not laziness. That's clinical. Something has broken down, either physically or mentally, and the person needs help, not judgment. And the fourth pattern I see is increased criticism of others. When people feel they're losing control over their own bodies, their own independence, their own lives, that need for control has to go somewhere. So it comes out as criticism of everyone else. The way you're cooking dinner, the way you're driving, the way you're raising your children, it's not really about those things. It's about fear. It's about grief for what's being lost. It's about grasping for any sense of authority when so much authority has already slipped away. Here's what breaks my heart about all four of these patterns. They create a cycle. The behavior pushes people away. The isolation increases. And the behavior gets worse. I've watched it happen over and over. The negative person becomes lonelier, which makes them more negative. The withdrawn person loses more connections, which deepens the depression. The criticism drives family away, which increases the fear and the need for control. If you're finding this helpful, I'd love to know you're here. Just drop a comment below to let me know this is reaching the people who need it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I share insights like these every week from my 15 years of working with seniors. Now let me tell you about the patterns that signal something even more concerning. Now I need to tell you about the patterns that worry me most. These are the behaviors that signal someone is slowly giving up. Not dramatically, but in small increments that are easy to miss until you step back and see the whole picture. The first is when someone's living space becomes overwhelmed with clutter or mess. I've cared for two different people, both 79 years old, and both developed this pattern after losing their spouse. But the reasons were completely opposite. One man started filling his home with things: newspapers, boxes, items from the thrift store. His apartment went from tidy to overwhelming within a year. He was surrounding himself with stuff because he couldn't bear the empty spaces. Every item was a buffer against the silence, against the loneliness, against the grief he couldn't name. The other was a woman who went the opposite direction. She started giving everything away. Her daughter would visit and notice another piece of furniture gone, another box of belongings donated. The house got emptier and emptier. And what the daughter didn't realize until much later was that her mother had decided she was done. She was clearing out because she'd made a choice to stop fighting. Both patterns, the hoarding and the emptying, were about the same thing: grief, hopelessness, different expressions of giving up. The next pattern is refusing help while clearly struggling. I watch this one constantly. Someone can barely walk but insists they don't need a cane. Someone hasn't eaten a proper meal in days but won't accept help with groceries. And families often interpret this as stubbornness. But here's what I've learned. When you've lost so much independence already, when you need help getting dressed, when you can't drive anymore, when your body doesn't do what you tell it to, refusing help in the areas where you still can refuse becomes your last foothold of control. It's not stubbornness, it's dignity desperately trying to hang on. Then there's the repetition of stories. When someone tells you the same story for the fifth time that week, families often assume it's memory loss. And sometimes it is. But more often, in my experience, it's something else. It's loneliness. It's the deep human need to be witnessed. When someone keeps telling you about the time they met their spouse, or their years in the military, or raising their children, they're not forgetting they told you. They're trying to stay connected to who they were. They're trying to matter. They're trying to be seen as a person with a history, not just as someone who needs help with their medication. I cared for a man I'll call Robert. He was 68 when his wife died, and within months, he stopped showering, stopped shaving, stopped changing his clothes. His son was frustrated. He thought Robert was being lazy, maybe even manipulative, trying to force his son to move back home. But I was there 3 days a week, and I saw what was really happening. Robert wasn't choosing not to shower. He literally couldn't find the energy to begin. The depression that had moved in after his wife's death made every small task feel insurmountable. Getting up, walking to the bathroom, turning on the water, each step required more energy than he had to give. The same thing happens when someone stops caring about their appearance, or starts eating the same simple foods over and over, or stays in their night clothes all day. Families see these behaviors and think, they've gotten lazy, they've stopped trying. But here's what I want you to understand. Sometimes staying in night clothes isn't comfort. Sometimes it's, I've stopped trying. And that difference matters, because one is a choice and the other is a cry for help. If you're recognizing these patterns in yourself, please hear me. This isn't about shame. Your body and mind are trying to tell you something, and there are people who can help if you're willing to reach out. These behaviors don't have to be permanent. I've watched people come back from this darkness when they got the right support. But first, someone has to notice. Someone has to care enough to ask the harder questions. Not, why won't you shower? But, what's making this feel so hard right now? There are 2 more patterns I need to share, and then I want to talk about what we can actually do about all of this. The first is aggressive or hostile communication. I've watched gentle people become sharp, kind people become cruel. And what I've learned is that this hostility is almost never about the thing they're yelling about. It's fear and pain coming out sideways. When you're scared about what's happening to your body, when you're grieving the independence you've lost, when you're in constant physical discomfort, that has to go somewhere. And sometimes it comes out as anger toward the people closest to you. The last pattern is manipulative behavior, using guilt or control to get what you want. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about someone being intentionally cruel. I'm talking about what happens when other power is gone, when you can't drive anymore, when you can't manage your own medications, when you need help with things you used to do without thinking. Control shows up in the ways still available. If you really loved me, you'd visit more. I'll just stop taking my pills if you're going to treat me this way. It's not manipulation in the traditional sense. It's desperation. It's trying to hold on to any sense of agency when so much agency has already been lost. Now, here's what I need you to understand. Beneath every single one of these 12 patterns is something trying to be heard. Pain, depression, grief, fear, loss of purpose, loss of control. The behavior is never the problem. The behavior is the symptom. And this is where most families get stuck. They're trying to fix the symptom instead of addressing what's underneath. Remember Margaret, the woman who became so negative and critical? Once we got her arthritis pain properly managed, I watched the gracious woman return. It took about 6 weeks. The flowers came back on her table. She started asking about my day again. Her daughter told me she felt like she'd gotten her mother back. But here's the thing. None of that would have happened if we'd just kept focusing on the negativity itself. We had to ask what was causing it. So if you're the person experiencing these patterns in yourself, I want you to get curious. Which of these behaviors feel new to you? And what changed around the time they started? Did you lose someone? Are you in pain you haven't mentioned? Are you feeling more isolated than you used to? That's your clue. Your body and mind are trying to tell you something, and the behavior is the language they're using. And if you're the family member watching someone you love go through this, the question to ask isn't, why won't you shower? Or, why are you being so negative? The question is, what's hard right now? That shift, from judgment to curiosity, from fixing to understanding, changes everything. I've watched it transform relationships. I've watched it open up conversations that families had been avoiding for years. Here's what actually helps: talking to a doctor about what's changed. Depression in older adults often looks different than in younger people. It shows up as irritability, as withdrawal, as physical complaints. Pain that's been dismissed as just arthritis might need better management. A therapist who specializes in aging can help with grief, with loss of purpose, with the massive identity shift that comes with needing more help. And sometimes having a caregiver, even just a few hours a week, gives both the senior and the family some breathing room. I've watched 80-year-olds reclaim themselves when someone finally asked the right question. When someone said, "I notice you're not yourself lately. Can we talk about what's going on?" Not in an accusatory way, in a loving way, in a "I see you and I care" way. These patterns don't have to be permanent, but someone has to be willing to look underneath them. Before we wrap up, let me share why this matters so much to me and what I hope you'll take from all of this. I've spent 15 years in this field because I believe the later years of life can be some of the most meaningful if we approach them with awareness and intention. But I've also held too many hands at the end. I've sat with too many families who kept saying the same thing. "I wish someone had told us. I wish we'd known what to look for. I wish we'd understood what was happening. I wish we'd had more time." That's why I make these videos, not to scare you, not to make you feel guilty or ashamed, but to give you what I wish I could give every family I've worked with: awareness, while there's still time to do something about it. If you're the senior watching this, if you've recognized yourself in some of these patterns, I want you to hear me clearly. This isn't about shame. These behaviors aren't who you are. They're signals about what you need. Your body is trying to tell you something. Your mind is trying to tell you something. And getting help isn't giving up. It's the opposite. It's fighting back. It's refusing to let pain or depression or grief take more from you than they already have. I've watched people in their 70s and 80s reclaim parts of themselves they thought were gone forever. I've seen depression lift when someone finally got treatment. I've seen anger dissolve when pain was properly managed. I've seen isolated people reconnect when someone helped them find their purpose again. These patterns don't have to be your permanent reality, but you have to be willing to reach out. You have to be willing to say, "I need help." And if you're the family member watching this, if you're worried about a parent or loved one, I want to say something to you too. The guilt you carry, the feeling that you're not doing enough, that you should have noticed sooner, that you should visit more often. I see it in every family I work with, every single one. And I need you to know you're doing the best you can with what you know. You can't be there every day. You can't notice everything. That doesn't make you a bad daughter or son. It makes you human. The fact that you're here, watching this, trying to understand, that tells me everything I need to know about how much you care. And now you have more information. Now you know what to look for. Now you know the questions to ask. Not, "Why won't you shower?" but "What's hard right now?" Not judgment, but curiosity. Not fixing, but understanding. These conversations are hard. I know that. I've been in the room for thousands of them, but they're also necessary because the alternative, the silence, the assumptions, the missed opportunities, that's harder. I've seen what happens when these conversations don't happen until it's too late, and I don't want that for you. So here's what I'm asking. If you recognized anything in this video, don't wait. Don't assume it will get better on its own. Don't convince yourself it's just normal aging. Talk to someone, a doctor, a therapist, a caregiver who can offer some support. Make the phone call you've been putting off. Have the conversation you've been avoiding, because awareness is only the first step. Action is what changes things. You've taken the first step by being here. That matters. Now take the next one. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And remember, you're not alone in this. I'll see you in the next one.